Thank you very much, Ricardo, for the warm welcome and the introduction. I won't go through that very long list of distinguished guests except to acknowledge Ahmet Polat from Affinity, also to Sev Ozdovsky, the Chair of the Australian Multicultural Council, but to all of our other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Can I say Assalamu alaikum? Peace be upon you. I'm humbled and honoured to be with you today to speak to you about diversity and inclusion in Australia. And I might start with some of the faith aspects, because for many Australians, practicing a faith is a very important part of everyday life. And we've heard a lot about the 2016 census data, which tells a complex story of faith. We've heard the headlines, 30% of Australians identifying as having no religion. Of course, the vast majority, 60%, more than 14 million people, do identify with a religion. If you're wondering how those two figures match up, there's about 9% who refuse to say. So I imagine many of those are probably religious people, many aren't, but so we can probably say around 2/3 of Australians consider themselves religious in one form or another. Something I think that's been largely missing in the commentary around the census, and that I think is interesting, is that since the 2006 survey, there's been significant increases in the numbers of people practicing Hinduism, Buddhism and Islam. And of course, we remain a majority Christian nation. Around 52% of Australians identify as Christian. Australians come from about 300 different backgrounds, and we speak more than 300 languages, including Indigenous languages. We are becoming increasingly diverse, a fact that underscores the importance of the government's work in the multicultural affairs portfolio and the work that organisations such as Affinity do to promote intercultural connection and understanding. Now, the Prime Minister at the recent interfaith breakfast at Parliament House said, "Diversity enriches us. The more we understand each other, the more enriched we are." And I agree. While we are a nation of diverse cultures, we are united by common values. As an Australian of faith, I value the protection, freedoms of religion, but also other freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of enterprise, freedom of association. And I think it's important that we have mutually respectful dialogue and understanding, whatever our backgrounds. Today, we bridge our diverse backgrounds, increasing opportunities for open and honest dialogue. Intercultural events such as these help reduce the possibility of tension within and between communities and strengthen social harmony. I want to congratulate Affinity Intercultural Foundation for your work in successfully building relationships between people of diverse faiths and backgrounds. In my view, Affinity works effectively in interfaith and intercultural dialogue because you approach things, I think, in a distinctly Australian way, with openness, collaboration and education through your valuable lunch and lecture series and dinners. Today, I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution that many Muslims make to Australian society. From the Makassar fishermen who traded with our first Australians in the 1600s, to the Afghan camel drivers of the 1800s, to the teachers, artists, business leaders, public servants, sporting leaders, community leaders that make up the Australian community and many of whom are in this room today. Muslim Australians contribute to many facets of our lives and have brought with them a wealth of knowledge, skills and aspirations, the benefits of which can be seen in Australia's economy, cultural and educational sectors. Can I say at a personal level, I greatly value the emphasis on family within our Australian Muslim community. Regardless of our cultural background and the religion we practice or don't practice, each of us makes Australia what it is today and what it will be in the future. Australia's diversity is one of our nation's great strengths. The benefits of diversity are far-reaching in every field. Diversity brings in skills, creativity, innovation, knowledge and productivity. National research consistently indicates high levels of belonging across our society. And we hear, I think, a lot to the contrary these days, but it's worth reflecting on some of the research that's been done in this area. There is high levels of support for a multicultural Australia. According to the most recent Scanlon Foundation report, Australia remains a stable and highly cohesive and integrated society. 83% of those surveyed in 2016 agreed that multiculturalism is good for Australia. And 91% had a sense of belonging in Australia. Those are important figures, and those are figures I think we can be proud of and we can certainly continue to build on. As the Prime Minister often says, Australia is one of the most successful multicultural societies in the world. We've been able to achieve this success because of our fundamental values of mutual respect and mutual responsibility. Australia's approach to a multicultural society is to maintain a safe and prosperous nation based on respect for Australian law and our shared values of respect, equality and freedom. And this requires tolerance and commitment by all members of the community, both new and established. Now, the government's commitment was reaffirmed in March of this year when the Prime Minister and I launched the Australian Government's new multicultural statement, Multicultural Australia, United, Strong, Successful. And it sets the vision for embracing diversity while emphasising our unique national identity and the importance of being an integrated and united people. It also sets government directions for the coming years in encouraging economic and social participation of new arrivals, harnessing the advantages of our diversity and shared national interest, and continuing to build harmonious and cohesive societies. It also speaks of some of the great freedoms that we enjoy in this country. The importance of interfaith and intercultural dialogue was also reflected in the statement. And I think one of the important parts of the statement that I think was slightly different from previous multicultural statements was very much about, this is a project that is about all of us. There has been a feeling in the past that this idea of a multicultural Australia is about people from non-English speaking backgrounds or people who have arrived here in recent years. I reject that, and our multicultural statement says that whether it's our Indigenous who have been here for tens of thousands of years, whether it is people who came on the first fleet or very soon after European settlement, or whether it's the millions of people who have come from all over the world, our multicultural story is about all of those. It is not just about a select few, and I think that's very important. It should be a unifying statement rather than something that can feel like it's in some way dividing us. So we have a strong foundation for social cohesion, but of course we're not immune to pockets of unrest and tension. And I spoke previously of the threat of terrorism, and I named it. I talked about the threat of Islamist terrorism. Now, why did I do that? Some people said, you know, why are you doing that? And the reason I named it, and very specifically named it, I talked about extreme Wahhabist Salafist teaching, was because when we have these discussions and when political leaders say we're not going to discuss religion, I think that allows the extreme voices to rise up. I think that pretending there is no issue allows extreme voices to rise up. When we name the specific ideology, what it does is it says that our Muslim community is not the problem. Our Muslim community will, along with the rest of our community, be a part of the solution. We need to call out extremism in all its forms. I think if we do that honestly and openly, I think that is a unifying thing rather than a divisive thing. And I think some of those extreme voices we do hear, some of those anti-Islam voices or anti-immigrant voices we hear, I think they become stronger when we don't have open and honest dialogue. That is my view, and that's one of the reasons I've put those things on the agenda. I know that many in this room share that belief. Can I say, at a recent iftar dinner in Melbourne, Human Rights Commissioner Edward Santow summed it up succinctly. He talked about our freedoms and our security as not being mutually exclusive. Integration cannot be achieved only by a security perspective through counter-terrorism laws and de-radicalisation programs. Our federal and state governments should continue, of course, to target violent extremism in order to maintain the peace and safety of our nation. However, there also needs to be leadership from communities to commit to contesting ideas and embracing pluralism while rejecting religious extremism as being incompatible with the Australian way of life. Social cohesion is important to the long-term stability of Australia, and should these concerns be left unaddressed and our social cohesion was to erode significantly, it would of course have very significant negative impacts. I acknowledge, though, in having these conversations, that our Muslim community does feel a burden sometimes and feels that there is a spotlight on them and their leadership, and I acknowledge that. And I believe that in having those conversations honestly, we empower Australians of whatever faith, including the wonderful Muslim Australians who have made such a contribution to our community. The Scanlon Foundation survey did still find some negative attitudes towards Muslims or towards Islam in Australia, and I think that is something we need to address. That is something we need to continue to work towards, because I, as an individual, I, as Assistant Minister for Multicultural Affairs, I don't want to see any group in our community, be it by virtue of their religion, by virtue of their race, by virtue of their background, feel excluded. I want to see an Australia where all of us feel welcome, and I cited the earlier figures. I think they are very encouraging. We have to acknowledge that it's not all perfect, that there is a way to go, and we should continue to have honest conversations about that. But I commend so many of our leaders who work towards community harmony, who work towards bringing us together, who reject the extreme voices at whatever end of the political spectrum. The Australian Government plays an important role in ensuring Australia continues to be one of the most socially cohesive nations in the world. We know that the economic and social integration by new migrants and their families is vital to their future, and providing a settlement framework we believe is best practice, and it is widely considered best practice to help migrants integrate into Australian life. So Australia's successful settlement and migration story is well worth reflecting on. Along with refugees and other migrants who have helped Australia become one of the most diverse, prosperous and harmonious nations on earth, our governments, organisations, businesses, communities and individuals have helped build and maintain our social cohesion. Since 1945, we've welcomed 7.5 million migrants from all corners of the earth to make their home here, including more than 865,000 under our humanitarian program. I think that's something we should be very proud of. We've had significant intakes of refugees from Europe after World War II, from Vietnam after 1975. And this success story has reached another milestone recently as the final families from an additional intake of 12,000 Syrians and Iraqis settle into life in Australia. Our ongoing humanitarian program has increased to 16,250 places this year and will increase again to 18,750 places in 2018-19. Now, on a per capita basis, that is about the most generous resettlement program in the world. Throughout this year, I've had the privilege of meeting and talking with new refugee arrivals around the country, as well as staff and volunteers from settlement service providers. These refugees have very moving stories, especially those of families fleeing war-torn regions in the Middle East, but of course we know other parts of the world as well. Many of the refugees who come to Australia are seeking protection from conflict and trauma, which is unimaginable to many of us. What was also clear to me during these meetings is how well Australians help settle people into their new lives and how we have been doing this for decades. Australia is consistently ranked as one of the top 3 resettlement countries in the world, and that's just in raw numbers. That's not taking account of population. And that's in terms of the number of places we make available for resettlement through the UNHCR. After his visit to Australia last year, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, Francois Crépeau, described Australia's settlement services as generous and well thought through integration programs. That is something that I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for. He was particularly impressed with the energy, imagination, dedication and commitment of civil society organisations working with migrants to deliver integration programs and services to them. And can I say, we have some representatives from some of those organisations here today, and I thank them for their work. We recently announced the merging of the Humanitarian Settlement Services and the Complex Case Support Programs to form the new Humanitarian Settlement Program. Now, the HSP will build skills and knowledge for the social and economic wellbeing of humanitarian entrants through a needs-based case management approach. Implementation of the HSP will bring significant improvements to the way the government delivers support services to humanitarian entrants. It will also encourage innovation and increased efficiency in service delivery, improve English language, education and employment outcomes for clients, which is absolutely critical, create linkages to the Adult Migrant English program, improve case management for individualised needs-based support, expand orientation to provide clients with foundation skills required for life in Australia, and introduce a new system to allow us to track clients over time. In addition, the Department of Social Services is working closely with other departments like Employment, Education and Training, Human Services and Immigration and Border Protection on improving employment outcomes for humanitarian entrants. That is something I think we all want to see, and there is great commitment in the sector and from the government to make that happen. Ladies and gentlemen, can I say in conclusion that we do have a very good story to tell. We could focus on the failings. There are failings. We as a nation don't always get it right. There are pockets, unfortunately, of racism and discrimination. We need to call those out when we see it. We need to respond to it strongly and firmly and call it for what it is. But we shouldn't get bogged down in thinking that that represents most Australians. It does not. I think Australia has a great story to tell about who we are as a people. I think that there will be growing support for the diversity of our nation, provided that leaders right across our community in politics, religious leaders, community leaders and others continue to work for social cohesion. Integration is a key part of that. We want people who come and settle here to become part of Australia, to feel part of Australia, and to be able to participate in whatever way they want to. The Australian government will continue to work for these goals, but we'll do so always telling the story about what a great multicultural society we are. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm very much looking forward to a bit of a Q&A. Thank you.